Thank you very much, Leon, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much to Kerry, because I think in the faculty of symbiosis, we need tea learning. So thank you very much for that fantastic platform. And Injairo and I are going to share this session. She's been a lead researcher in this particular program that I'm going to just share some very quick insights with you. I'm in an education faculty, and so our interest is really looking at, transformative approaches to education in these kind of complex times of climate change. And we've kind of worked with this idea of tea learning. We worked also with Aryan and his team and a number of other scholars around the world. I'll tell you briefly about it, on trying to develop this idea of another kind of pedagogy and practice for universities. So I just wanted to appreciate the invitation to be here. It's my first visit to Bristol. I've really enjoyed it. I particularly love your street art, but also a very good feeling in the university, which has been fantastic to experience. And I think also to thank you, and I always do this in scientific communities, and especially sustainability science communities or environmental science communities, to allow the social sciences to also speak, because for a long time their voices have been quite silent in this story of the sustainability sciences and how to respond. And to speak with emerging grammars to develop new praxis for engaging with climate change out of our universities. So that's kind of where I want to speak from today, and to share with you a project that we've been working on for the last 4 years. It's just recently come to an end, and we've been wrapping it up, and we're beginning to see some of the insights out of it. It's a project of the International Science Council and under their banner of Transformations to Sustainability. And it was a project to establish a transformative knowledge network. So we're here with Leon working on, I guess, another similar kind of question, another transformative knowledge network. So it's also a kind of big thing that we do these days in academia. We build transformative knowledge networks to try to learn from each other and to produce new ways of thinking about these kind of conundrums of our time. And it's fantastic to be able to do that, because you can really, work strongly across contexts and then get better insight into your own space. So this is the group of people we're working with. I won't go through it, but it was 4 continents and 9 countries, and huge number of people in the end that participated in this program, up to over 1,000 people actively participating in the projects and beginning to help develop this particular way of thinking about pedagogy and learning. So the problem that we were trying to address is that there's a very strong recognition that learning is essential for responding to global climate change and the kinds of challenges that we're facing, but that there's very little known about this type of learning that is needed, and also the associated processes and what the qualities of this learning, what the qualities of this kind of learning is. And this is what we were working on, specifically to kind of in a way, produce some insight into this, because it was not really available or not clear anywhere, actually. And we're sitting with this particular problem when we're doing this kind of work. We're sitting with a conundrum, and it's a tea learning conundrum. And the conundrum is that we're trying to produce knowledge of learning out of a culture and history of learning, research and theory, which in a way was produced for another time. So it's exactly the kind of thing that Kerry was pointing to. So how do you do that then? And even worse, when we do research, we look at the journals from all over the world, and we forget to see that these journals are produced here, okay? And the majority of the world's people that are really struggling with the impacts of climate changes are here. And who's producing knowledge for whom? And how do we turn that around? And what kind does it actually mean for knowledge production? What does it mean for how we think about learning? And so we have to actually be brave, push the boundaries, and begin to think very differently about how we do the research, what research we're doing, and what we want from research, and also from education and from universities, and to transgress the histories of, this kind of colonial practice, which continues, by the way, into the contemporary current. So the history of learning theory leaves us with 2 things. One is acquisition. So we think people have to acquire knowledge, right? Or to participate in activities. That's the history of learning theory. It leaves us with those 2 big metaphors for learning. And to produce another metaphor for learning requires a whole lot of other work. You can't rely only on histories of learning and learning theory. And we've worked with all sorts of different theory, decolonial theory, politics, philosophy, psychology, feminism, political ecology, science studies, trying to develop this metaphor of T-learning, and we still haven't fully written it up. We kind of almost ran out of time and capacity near the end. Also, these projects are also, by the way, always too short, 3 years instead of 5 or 10 years. But what we did do is we worked with a very large number of people, 20 cases across 4 countries, 9 continents and 9 countries, and we produced knowledge of the qualities of this kind of learning and some insights into what this is about. And I want to just quickly share some of them with you and then hand over to Njaru, who will give you a view from the in-depth work that she did to also develop some of the qualities of this kind of learning with a number of young people. So we were trying to develop this as a concept, a new counter-hegemonic concept, because we need new concepts also to guide our thinking and practice. And the old concepts are inadequate. So we need to develop these new counter-hegemonic concepts that can lead us and to lead our thinking. And we've got to do careful work on describing things. So we've used T-learning quite purposefully because there's so many different T's: transdisciplinary, transformative, together. Transgressive is the one we found quite absent, generally absent. So we decided to work more on that. And now we also need to think much more about what this means for curricula and more, what's the kinds of things that also Kerry was talking about as we reimagine the university and its practices. So here's some of the qualities of T-learning, and I'm going to touch them very, very quickly, and they come from the different sites. This one comes from Malawi, but it was also shared across the site. So I've just given you a window on some of the cases, but also trying to share some of the kind of more general insights. Make time and space for co-defining matters of concern and identify absences, things that are not immediately visible. This is a big project. If you know critical realism, it's a big work to identify absences. And Lee Price is here, who taught me how to do that. So all of these have got a lot of work behind them. So they look very simple, but actually it's quite a process of really beginning to rethink the foundations of education and learning. Develop tools and methods that bring knowledge and experience together in situated dialectical relations of emergence. And that also is a mouthful, and there's a lot that sits in there and behind it. But essentially, we need ways of mobilizing our knowledge and experience together in new forms of emergence. And I think Kerry mentioned something similar in her talk. Care enough to put the worst toxins and the most affected first in our praxis. And this is work from Jane Burt's T-Learning project, where she worked with mine-affected communities in South Africa. The most unbelievable forms of toxic pollution going into the rivers in order to produce coal, in order to burn the fossil fuels that we're sitting with, and in fact are actually killing people and producing really bad environments for young children to grow up in, and so on. Embrace plurality as a principle for cognitive and hermeneutic justice. And that includes silent knowledges, things that have never been said or will not be easily said in the open. How do we create space for those kinds of knowledges in addition to the ones that are actually expressed? This is from Colombia, it's the groups that Aryan was working with. Unearth fertile contradictions honestly. And this is an image from the student movement in South Africa. And it really opened up massive contradictions in the university and education system. And Njaru really has been working, very carefully on that over time. Cross taken for granted boundaries, challenge oppressive power relations, and build agency power collectively. This is a case from Zimbabwe, working with farmers' organizations in and out of the formal university system. Reclaim, evaluate, renew, and regenerate cultural practices that work. And this is a fantastic case study of a practice in our province called Ilima, where the university students moved out of the university and started to work with the communities on a cultural practice which was well established in communities but got lost. So there are these possibilities as well. Share useful scientific insights more equitably, effectively, and practically. And this is from Vietnam. And the simple thing, setting up a kind of a platform where farmers and scientists could meet and talk together and try to understand each other and share very valuable scientific knowledge for how to deal with climate change and adaptation practices in the Mekong Delta. balance, recognize, and make space for empathy and anger to coexist. And this is challenging. We always want to wipe it out. We want to wipe anger out or only use one particular way of thinking about emotion. And actually we need both, and we need to balance them out and hold them together. This is work from Dylan McGarry in South Africa. Build inquisitive solidarity networks, and I like this one. You know, inquisitive solidarity networks. It's a really interesting kind of practice. This is from India, from the Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Peace and Education for Sustainable Development. Lovely young people doing really interesting work there. Participate in building alternative systems and practice that are not yet there. This is from Arjan's case study in the Netherlands. And actually building local food economies that don't actually exist and put them in place. With honesty and pain, transgress aggression, depression, and fear to avoid paralysis. And this was a big one, actually. Many people are paralyzed, they're fearful. I think Kerry mentioned some of that. And then how do we transgress this sort of pain and anxiety? And we have to be brave enough to do that. And also, as Kerry was saying, work with others to do it together. It's difficult to do on your own. So that kind of a dimension as well. So these are all just different dimensions of this T-learning practice that I was mentioning, one of which also is to develop this commitment to knowledge democracies. We had a little project called Tiny Books, which we developed as a kind of like a sort of, you know, a kind of indicator of thinking about knowledge democracy. And here's another one of these universities that Kerry was talking about. And out of the T-learning program, we came up with this idea of the pluriversity for stuck humans, because we were saying that it's not the climate that needs to change, it's us that needs to change. We are the stuck humans. So how do we make a university for stuck humans? And we have all sorts of departments there. I wrote a piece on the Department of Attunement, and we have many others. And just reimagining, you know, what a different university would look like. And so it's another one of those same things that Kerry was talking about. So I'm going to hand over to Njaru now, who will just share with you some of the work she's done in one of these T-learning projects. It's an enormous project. Each one of these, by the way, is an enormous project.
Good afternoon. Nakuita wacha kujificha leta nguvu yetu tuende mbele. Nakuita sitajificha leta nguvu yetu tuende mbele. Nakuita wacha kujificha leta nguvu yetu tuende mbele. Nakuita sitajificha leta nguvu yetu tuende mbele. I just wanted to bring a little bit of the spirit of the work that we're doing into the room. Just as a way to speak very briefly about the work that we've been doing together. The song that I just sang is really a song about a call to action, calling all of ourselves to the issue so that we can take ourselves forward. As Hayla said, I've been working primarily with change drivers from across South Africa, and we've been exploring together what transgressive decolonial pedagogical practice looks like. So for us, we've been reflecting on the times, as all of the presentations have been speaking about, and for us, looking at social and ecological justice, and the social aspect of it is really important in our context as well because of the levels of inequality and poverty and the issues that we're facing. We've been trying to really tune into what is sitting at the edge of our own praxis and to create educational spaces that can help us work meaningfully with that. And this is because in our understanding, sustainability or regenerative futures really relies on our ability to mobilize and deploy ourselves in cognitive, effective, ethical, and relational ways that we haven't been doing up until this point. So it's quite a significant challenge for us to lean into other ways of being that can help us move towards a future worthy of our longing. And this is basically a commitment to renegotiate many things in ways that can create more solidarity, more cohesion, and more expressions of ourselves in the world. We acknowledge that we are bound in fate with each other and the earth, and so we're trying to figure this out together. In the context that we are working, understanding the history of the African context and the history of the South African context is a very important part of the work. We are doing work to remember those who sought to create a different destiny for African futures. And we appreciate the bridges that were built so that we could walk over them and arrive as I am here today. We're beginning to see the work that it took to try and seed a new paradigm into an old recalcitrant one, if you look at the liberation movements across Africa and in South Africa. And as part of this, we are acknowledging the tensions, the impasses, and the compromises that have been faced in the past, and the brave beginnings that were tried to be carved out as part of this work. We're trying to bear witness to the scars accumulated over time, and we know that something is being asked of us now, as it was for them. So there's a very ancient urgency in this journey. And as part of this, we're trying to go deep into understanding and appreciating the life worlds of our communities and our ancestry. We're trying to go into deep forays of excavation to understand where and what we have come from. Our reflections are all weighed collectively. We are choosing to accompany each other on our journeys, and we are constantly curious and present to what lies at the corner of our collective explorations. We're trying to acknowledge the interlinked cycles of regenerative indigenous strategies, survival, the intergenerational traction built over time, the sense of denial, assimilation, stasis, processing, resurgence that we have faced over time. We are trying to psychically metabolize what is unprocessed between our generations, using emotional landscapes and our imaginations as a guide. We are trying to face the unanswered questions that are forged through intergenerational struggles. And in this way, we're trying to remain faithful to those who have come before, while also trying to arrive fully into the present moment that we are in. We are insisting that we are not too late, as most people look at the African continent. And it's not that we're not, and we are not yet ready. We are here. And what we are creating is already underway. We challenge ourselves to recognize the patterns that have established themselves over time and how they persist within the present. And we recognize that hierarchical and oppressive ways of being echoed throughout history, including the pre-colonial, the colonial, and the neoliberal iterations that we are in right now. Acknowledging how we often inherit a vision of the world that is given to us by others. So we are attentive to the autopilot in our muscle memories that continues to imprint colonial ways of beings into our actions. And we know that the myth that any of us is separate from the whole is a carefully administered illusion, because some truths and questions might lie within us, but all answers lie between us. And so relationality is the greatest strength of every counter-hegemonic response that we're trying to be a part of. We embrace the movements towards pluriversal futures by taking the responsibility to put ourselves in spaces where we have to learn to meaningfully coexist with others. We acknowledge how fragile we have become and how our vulnerability based on our privileges cannot protect us from the great work that is underway. We are trying to baptize ourselves into a bigger world by seeking out what we were never taught to see. And because this is an inevitable part of what is to come, and so we might as well get started with that work. Never losing sight of the irony that some of us can begin to do so by choice. Our gestures are generous and provocative, and they primarily seek to serve as invitations that can draw in those who are curious and want to try. We seek to disseminate interest and create friendships. And we're starting to think about what it means to become worthy ancestors ourselves. We take seriously what is to become of the millions of young minds that are still inculcated by the colonial matrix. And we seek to breathe new life into our ways of seeing and being. We want to clear the space for all our arrivals, because the future is a scary place without the gifts of the young. Thank you.